Now, I have learned a lot more about how to explain risk, because if somebody tells me that by doing something I double or treble my risk of it, I get very frightened. But if I know that my actual risk is so tiny that doubling it or trebling it makes no difference, I stop being frightened. So I explain this to girls and women by saying, do you still buy a lottery ticket at the weekends? Some of us still do. We still have some kind of faith. Okay, if you buy a lottery ticket at the weekends, I can double your chance of winning the national lottery this weekend by giving you another lottery ticket. What's your chance of winning? It's still nil. It's actually made no difference. And at the time the trial was stopped early, because of these terrible increased risks, they'd already found a 37% reduction in bowel cancer, a reduction of hip fractures by a third, and a reduction in total fractures by 24%. But of course, none of us were listening by that stage. We'd listened to the 41% increased risk of stroke, and we were all panicking. But what does this actually mean? Let me show you what those statistics actually mean. The 26% increased risk of breast cancer is this. It's an increase from 30 to 38 women per 10,000 women per year. And that is a 26% increase. And that is what we had always known, that any woman who chooses to use HRT stays at the same risk as she would have been of breast cancer if her own ovaries had gone on functioning. For each year of use, you're at exactly the same risk as if your ovaries were still there rather than being postmenopausal. That is what that risk is. The 29% increased risk of heart attack was an increase from 30 to 37 women per 10,000 women per year. The 41% increased risk of stroke, which was the one that was the death knell of this trial, and therefore the death knell of HRT for women, mainly in the UK, but also in other countries, was an increase from 21 women to 29 women per 10,000 women per year. And double the risk of blood clots was simply this: 18 more blood clots per 10,000 women per year, 8 of which will be pulmonary emboli, the clots in the lungs, and your risk of dying from that is about 1%. Overall, and I think this is the most frightening thing, in the women who were on the HRT, if we compare them with the women who were on the placebo, when that trial was stopped because of this huge increased risk, there was no difference at all in death rate from all causes in the two groups. So that's interesting. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about breast cancer, because I know that 1 in 9 of us will develop it, and I know when I talk to an audience of women, I am talking to women who have breast cancer. So what do we know about HRT and breast cancer? Well, this may look like old data, but it is what we know. We know what I said earlier, that in fact for each year of HRT use, we stay at exactly the risk we would have been if our ovaries had functioned for a year. And we can add it up. We can say that if the normal rate of breast cancer is 45 out of 1,000 women by the age of 65, if you have used HRT for 5 years between the age of 50 and 55, then by the age of 65 there will be an extra 2 women with breast cancer. Now the problem with that is that all 47 of those 1,000 women who've been on HRT and have then gone on to develop breast cancer will blame the HRT. It's natural, it's psychological. We think, my goodness, I used that HRT and I've got breast cancer. 47 would have developed it anyway. So it's a very difficult thing to tease this all out. But in fact, we're now getting more data to help women put it into perspective. So that if you look at risk, we can talk now about the risk of breast cancer being increased by us being overweight or having postponed our first pregnancy until after the age of 30, or by drinking more than 3 units of alcohol a day, 3 small glasses of wine. That increases our risk by 38%. So we have to be able to put this into a picture. So the 27% increase that we get with HRT is in fact something that we need to put into the spectrum of all the other risks which are part of our life. We now know from looking at all the trials that in fact, if you use HRT at the genuine young age, round the time of the menopause, and use it for about 5 years or so, that HRT reduces total death rate in women under the age of 60. And in fact, overall, there's no change in all-cause death rate, even in women over the age of 60. So we're putting it now into perspective. And we're starting, even as early as 2004, 3.5 years ago, to have some good news stories coming out about it again, that the health scare over HRT may be unfounded. Women on HRT can prolong lives before starting at the age of 60. And then we get some reports saying that there's been a U-turn on the risks of HRT, and this is by Jenny Hope in the Daily Mail, that millions of women may have been scared into abandoning HRT unnecessarily. So this is what we pick up and read all the time. And I think it's fascinating that it's a very difficult world to actually make our choices in. So what women ask me is, well, are there other forms of menopause therapy if I find I can't struggle through, if I'm really not struggling through, or I would like to protect myself from something, what can I do which isn't to do with replacing my hormone? Well, one of the things that's been ongoing for many, many years now is the idea that our own natural estrogen has really good benefits, but also some risks. And that's what I've been saying to you all morning, that they're attached to using HRT are some risks of keeping ourselves estrogenized, even though it is our natural hormone, for longer. So the boffins, the scientists, for many years have been trying to find something which would have the good estrogenic properties but not the negative ones. And one of the first to come out was called Tibolone, and it has estrogenic properties and progestogenic properties, and interestingly some testosteronogenic properties, which means it gives us a little bit of sex drive and all sorts of things as well. But what about using something else? Is HRT unnatural? Well, we now know that replacing estrogen is particularly important for women. Let's say you've had a premature menopause. Now, that's something that I will never cease to say. Whatever our choices may be when we go through the natural menopause, if that happens to us when we're in our 30s or 40s, for some girls, sadly, as early as their late teens and their 20s, then they were not designed to be without estrogen, and they should be offered, and it should be promoted that they have estrogen replacement until they get at least to the natural age of the menopause. Now, the reason I say this is because with the breast cancer scares, with the HRT scares, what has happened is a lot of very young women have been told they have had the full amount of HRT they can have. Oh, you've had your 5 years, it's now too scary, it's going to kill you, while they're still only in their late 30s or their 40s. And that's wrong. And there's a very good society called the Daisy Network that actually works with women who've had premature or early menopause. And it's one of the things that we really need to promote, is making sure that younger women realise that if it's happened to them, sadly, that early in life, that they have a different set of choices from the choices that we have when we get to the genuine post-menopause. What about the alternative or complementary options? Well, I don't know if any of you read the newspapers recently, but 2 books have been published about alternative medicine, one of which has been co-authored by Professor Edzard Ernst, who's the Professor of Complementary Medicine at the Exeter University School of Complementary Medicine. So he's a very renowned man. And he has done studies on all the alternatives to HRT. And there is absolutely no evidence at all that any of them, apart from black cohosh, are any better than placebo. And that's even only to do with controlling symptoms. So we know that black cohosh is better than placebo at controlling symptoms, and we know that's a fact. Now, black cohosh is not a phytoestrogen. It's not a plant-derived estrogen. It is just a herb. And one of the problems is we don't know about its long-term safety data, and we're not certain whether it might not have an effect on the liver in some women as they get older. So part of the problem with all of the things that we might offer as alternatives is we have no safety data. We cannot say they necessarily work, and we certainly can't say they're necessarily safe. And finally, I want to talk for a few more minutes on what I call silent postmenopausal problems, the things that most women find it very hard to admit to, even to their closest friends, and very few ask their doctors or nurses for help. They're very unaware of how common the problems are, and they're confused by the medical terminology. We've heard about vaginal dryness, and we know that our vagina becomes sore and it can burn and itch. We very rarely talk about the changes in appearance of the vulva. which isn't a family car. We should perhaps talk about it more commonly as the lips. But we very rarely talk about it. And I have had women in their 70s come to me saying, is it normal for me to look like that down there? Very, very worried about the changes in the appearance, because we know about the changes in our face and we don't necessarily like them, but we're not American. We don't all rush off and have them plumped full of various things. But the same changes happen in the lips down below. We get thinning of the vaginal skin, which is easily damaged and poorly lubricated, and friction can cause pain. And it's not just sex that can become painful. Normal daily activity, like trying to walk when your bits are rubbing and your undercarriage is rubbing on your pants, can cause huge problems and grief for a lot of women. So, of course, we get embarrassment about sex, but we also get problems just in normal daily life. And one of the things which is very, very traumatic for a lot of women as they enter the postmenopause and go through it is I've had quite a few clients who have been really worried about the fact that because everything is altering down below and everything is sort of withdrawing, the clitoris can actually become exposed. And so they can find that they're rubbing parts of themselves they really do not want to be interested in any longer at all. And they get very, very traumatized, not surprisingly, by the physical and emotional problems that that can lead to. But you know, we need to know that these things can at least happen, because the women who come to me feel this huge burden of guilt, and they are incredibly ashamed that these awful things are happening to them. And it's not just them, it's all of us.